Waypoints, the podcast of fly fishing travel. With helpful travel tips, news and events, destination profiles, great stories, and expert advice from seasoned and experienced traveling anglers, this is your backstage pass to the world of fishing travel. Waypoints is fueled by adventure and brought to you by Yellow Dog Flyfishing, a hands-on specialty travel and booking company that delivers the industry's very best insider knowledge, logistical support, and trip preparation. Freshwater or saltwater, international or domestic, Yellow Dog has you covered. And now your host, Yellow Dog founder and director, Jim Klug.
So I'm joined today by Camille Egdorf, a name that many of you know and one that seems to be everywhere these days in the world of fly fishing. Camille, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So you are literally everywhere these days. You're traveling the world for Yellow Dog. You're featured in ad campaigns for Costa and Sims, video profiles from Yeti. You're competing in and winning the adventure games. You have quite a life, Camille. Tell us a little bit about how you would describe your job and your profession.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of ways I could probably describe it, but it's definitely adventuresome and unique, and it's a lot of fun. Get to do a lot of really neat travel and talk and speak with a lot of neat people. So it's really great. It's wonderful.
How would you describe your job as far as what you do when someone says, Camille, what do you do?
Yeah, well, basically I just tell them, well, I help you and others plan trips to Alaska, Christmas Island, and maybe other places too, depending on where they want to go. But basically I'm there as a resource to get them on their favorite trip somewhere.
There we go. So how did you personally and professionally find your way to fly fishing? Tell us about kind of growing up, what it was like in the Egdorf household as a young kid and a young girl growing up.
Yeah. Well, I would guess I could say that I was just kind of born into it. My parents have a lodge in Alaska on the Upper Nushagak, and I was 6 months old when I spent my first summer in Alaska, and surrounded by nothing but fishing guides and anglers and wilderness and an incredible fishery. So just throughout my upbringing, it was only natural for me to eventually pick up a fly rod, and it kind of just all took off from there and started guiding when I was 18. And I really just kind of always, that's all I've ever really known.
You never really found your way to fly fishing. You were born into it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Well, you talked about growing up in that camp on the Nushagak. I mean, I've seen pictures that your mom, Kim, has showed us of you're literally less than a year old and you're on the floor of the cook tent up there. And I mean, that was your life growing up.
Yeah, I think my crib was a cardboard box at one point. I never seen
Easier
photos
to fly
of it.
in.
Right, yeah.
That's right. So, of course, talking about growing up, we got to talk about your parents. I mean, Kim and Dave Egdorf, both legends. Your dad, we actually did an article about him a couple years ago, and I think we titled it "The Toughest Man Alive." He is just an absolute creature, your father, and whether it's hunting, trapping, fishing, flying, running a camp, outfitting, I mean, he's the real deal.
Yeah, he is. He's a man's man, that's for sure.
And what a great role model and a great father.
Oh gosh, yeah. I mean, I wish I had half the skills, even a quarter of the skills that he does, because he really does have a lot of different things that he does and has been good at and has seen. And anyways, having him as a role model and a father growing up, it's been an adventure in itself, really.
Well, and he, everything that he did and all that he loves, he made sure that you were exposed to it at a young age, whether it was, hunting bears or flying the float plane. I mean, whatever it was, you did it all as a kid.
Yep. I've probably flown in that float plane more than many people ever will. And flown across more open land in Alaska than many people probably ever will. And I've seen some really neat things. And it's all due to my dad and my mom, of course. And a lot of what I've done today and what I have done in the past is all due to them. So I owe a lot to my parents.
Well, and we always talk about Dave Egdorf being the toughest man alive. That must have scared the hell out of your boyfriends in like high school when you're growing up.
He definitely had a reputation as being a scary individual. Especially his man cave. Everybody talked about that, and if you're going to date Camille, you're going to have to go and visit Dave's man cave and all of his guns and see if you ever come out.
Well, I always said if the world is coming to an end, I'm going over to Dave's house because he might be the last man standing right there. Yep. Well, that's great. What a great upbringing and great experiences. And, growing up, you didn't just work at the camp. You started guiding when you were 18, but you literally grew up there. I mean, your earliest memories were at that camp. So it's very much in your blood and kind of a part of who you are and who you've become.
Yep. Yeah, my first rainbow trout on a fly rod was caught right on the banks of the camp when I was 6, 7 years old, and lived the part of being in a lodge from the very beginning, all the way from being 6 months old all the way up to being where I am now. And I saw everything from not just the fishing and the guiding aspect of it, but also just working with clients and managing the camp and doing the camp chores and doing the Costco runs and going to town doing changeover and flight logistics. So, I definitely had a very, very upfront row seat to lodge life in Alaska.
Well, and it taught you about customer service and how
Yes.
to take care of people, which suits you well today in your present role as the Alaska Program Director for Yellow Dog.
Yes.
And every year you literally send hundreds of anglers a year up north to fish the legendary land of the midnight sun. If someone's looking to plan an Alaskan adventure and fish Alaska for the first time, Camille, where do they start? How do things get going?
Yeah, well, a lot of times people make the mistake of going to Google and typing in Alaska Fishing Lodge, and they come up with this
500 answers and options.
Exactly. And it's just a daunting thing to see, and they don't know where to start, which I don't blame them. I wouldn't know either.
Especially nowadays where everybody's got a flashy website that shows big fish and promises the world, right?
Yeah, I'm #1 fishing lodge in the world, or,
Right.
best fishing lodge in Alaska for rainbow trout. I mean, you hear it all.
But there's a huge difference
There is.
of all the operations, outfitters, lodges up there. I mean, you've got kind of the whole spectrum. So
Yeah.
where do you begin?
Yeah, well, it's going to the answer to that is going to be specific to the individual most times. And it largely has to do with, okay, well, what do you want to do, first and foremost? What kind of angler are you? And overall length of stay that you want, what kind of lodge experience you want. So there's kind of a number of different scenarios that come into finding that answer. And so I think the first thing is establishing or figuring out what it is you want to accomplish.
What type of trip? Really?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
And then, you've got different options. You've got like the do-it-yourself trips. You've got, the structured lodge packages where you show up and everything's included.
Yeah.
Then you've got more of kind of the slightly off the grid or fringe trips that might be, a multi-day river and camping trip in the wilderness of Bristol Bay or a number of different outdoor kind of backcountry experiences.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. So really kind of trying to figure out what type of trip is going to be the best fit. And that's really where you come in, trying to match people up with that.
Yep, exactly. And when you're trying to decide, or when you're talking with somebody that's trying to figure out what they want to do or where they want to go, there's people that like to streamer fish, there's people that like to dry fly fish, have that more classic approach with, a mayfly or, a caddis, something along those lines. Or they may want to catch a bunch of fish with, they don't mind fishing an indicator and an egg pattern every once in a while. And then you have, other anglers that maybe want to target that trophy fish of a lifetime. And so depending on what that person's wanting to do in those three categories, then you can start to narrow in on when to go and where to go and who to go with.
Well, let's talk about one of those aspects right there, the when to go aspect and the best season. And this is a question I know you get all the time. When is the best time to fish Alaska? When should I plan my trip? And there's no doubt that, as kind of a whole, Alaska's got a very defined summer season.
Yeah,
that's
it
when
does.
the snow is gone and when the temps are warmer and when the fish are most active. But talk to me about kind of the overall seasonal breakdown over the course of an Alaskan summer.
You got it. So Alaska season primarily runs from mid-June through sometimes all the way into the first week of October. So you have a pretty good window of time to really narrow down on. And Alaska fish is wonderful all throughout the season, first and foremost. There is not a bad time to go. You hear a lot of people say, well, August is the best time to fish Alaska, and not necessarily the case. It's a great time to be there, but it's not the only time. And so kind of breaking down those different seasons, there's 3 seasons within the season, if that makes sense. You have your early, mid, and late. And your early season is typically that mid-June through mid-July time frame. And this is going to be that time frame where if you really want to focus on dry flies, this is going to be the time to do that. You can fish a lot of streamers, you can fish mouse patterns, and largely that has to do with the fact that the salmon haven't shown up yet. And those fish aren't keying in on those eggs yet, so they're looking up. They're looking at chasing smolt, they're looking at chasing sculpins.
They're eating bugs.
Yeah, they're doing trout things. And plus, they're hungry after being deprived of food for 9 months.
They're slightly aggressive.
Right.
That's right.
Yep. So that's a great time for anybody that just doesn't want to deal with the egg game later on and doesn't need to catch that trophy fish, but wants to do something that's more specific like dries, mouse patterns, things of that nature.
Okay. So that's the early season from, say, early to mid-June to about mid-July.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And then once you start getting into late July, going into August, later August, I would say, this is kind of a time frame that starts to turn into a numbers game where the quality is still there, but you're going to start seeing a lot of fish. And that has to do with just those salmon are showing up.
The salmon have shown up, and so too has everything else.
Yes, exactly. All the dollies, all the small cookie cutter rainbows from lower in the river systems are all following those fish up to the upper river systems. And they're just waiting for that big egg drop. And so if you want to go up there and have, I don't want to put any numbers in anybody's head that it's a guarantee, but you could have days that are 40, 50, 60 plus fish days. And largely that's done on an egg and flesh pattern. But, it's that time frame where that magic can happen.
Well, and that's what all the fish in the ecosystem there are keying on.
Exactly, yeah.
The salmon and the eggs, and that's just the game that time of year.
Yeah.
And, you talked about the dollies and the cookie cutter rainbows, but the big fish are right in that mix as well. The big rainbows, a lot of times, have come out of the lakes. They've entered those river systems, and they're keyed in just like everything else.
Oh, yeah. Yep. You might have to be through a couple of 12 inchers to get to that 25, 26 incher, but you'll definitely get them.
They're there.
Yeah. Yep. They're definitely there.
And, it's interesting because when you talk about a lot of the fisheries in the lower 48, it's very much a hatch game.
Yes.
And while that can be the case in early season, as you were just saying, in a lot of the rivers in Alaska, it's a little different up there. Whereas here we might go from the stoneflies, and the caddis down to the mayflies, the terrestrials. Up there, so much of it revolves around the salmon and the different life cycles of the salmon. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, everything up there, from the bears to the mammals to the birds to the fish to the flora, fauna even in Alaska relies on those salmon. And it's really an incredible event when all of that takes place. Last year in 2018, 62 million sockeyes came back to the Bristol Bay watershed.
That's a staggering number.
It's unreal. And that's just sockeyes. That's not including the kings, the chums, the pinks, and the silvers.
Right.
So there's just an astronomical number of fish that go up to those river systems.
When you put
every year.
that number of sockeyes in the river, and if you've never been to Alaska or you've never seen this, the rivers can literally run red. When you're flying over in a float plane and you look down into the river channels, it is a bright red stripe all the way up. It's just choked full of salmon.
Yeah, you could walk across the water on salmon backs.
It's amazing. And
it's really, really cool.
And as you said, everything in that ecosystem depends on and is there because of those salmon.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And there's really no place like it in the world that you can see that.
No, there isn't.
So, you might start off, with the life cycle of the salmon. It might go from fish feeding on the fry to then transitioning and focusing on the egg drop.
Yep.
And then later in the season, they're eating the salmon as they've died and they're decaying. And, there's big chunks of flesh floating down the river, and those rainbows are just chowing it.
Yeah, they have a constant supply of protein throughout the entire season. And going back to the smolt, during that early season, that's when that smolt run out takes place. So previous years, salmon that have hatched usually smolt will spend a year, if not two, in those river systems growing up to being strong enough to going back out to the ocean. And so during that spring time, just after ice out's taken place, those smolt all migrate back downriver to the ocean. And so you'll have these bait balls of smolt that are huge, and you have rainbows. everything feeds on them. The birds, it's really a lot of, it's almost like you're out fishing in the ocean and you see this big bait ball and there's just stuff coming all over the place, just grabbing it.
From air,
every direction.
land, sea, water, everything.
Yeah,
it's
and
nuts.
so if you just have a little clouser minnow, an olive and white clouser minnow, or I mean, you could probably have any color, and you swing it out there as these smolt are going by, or if you see these birds busting bait, I mean, it's a fish almost every cast.
Yeah.
And so it's really a lot of fun. It doesn't take really much at all to have a fish on. I mean, you just put your fly out there and you just let it sit and you'll have one come up and grab it. It's
unlike anything in the world.
No. Yeah. It's really quite incredible. And then, as you mentioned, once the salmon show up, they start to drop their eggs. And then, of course, that big egg feed takes place. And you'll catch rainbows that are literally so engorged with eggs that they're puking them back up.
Yeah, as you land them and you put your hand underneath their belly, they're just spitting eggs out.
Yeah. And so it's just, you really learn really quickly how important that resource is. And of course, once you get into later in the season, those salmon start to die. And then their bodies are what in turn feed the rest of everything else, from feeding the baby smolt that are in the river system still from last year to, the sculpins and the bugs that are the entomology in the river systems. And of course, the rainbows, grayling dollies, the bears, the birds. And of course the trees. I mean, you'll see they've actually done studies of these spruce trees that have proteins left over in them from the salmon. It's really incredible.
All things are linked to the salmon up there.
They are.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when we talk about Alaska, a lot of times we focus on the big rainbows because as fly anglers, that's what people love.
Sure.
And so so much attention gets put on the rainbows, but there's a lot of anglers that like to go to Alaska and specifically target the salmon.
Mm-hmm.
So give us a quick rundown on the species that you find up there and kind of what the seasonality is of each particular species.
Yeah, you bet. Well, there's 5 different species of Pacific salmon that come into Alaska's river systems. You have your king, you have your chum, and you have your sockeye, silver, and then I'm missing one. There's the pink.
Right.
And they're from beginning of I would say the middle part of June all the way through to the end of the season. There are salmon that are either right at the very opening of these river systems or are at the tail end of their lifespan. And so there's always salmon around.
That's
right. And so the kings are the first ones to show up, and they're going to generally be that mid-June time frame. And there's some places that'll see them a little bit earlier. Southeast will see them maybe in May, and then other places might see them a little bit later in the season. But generally, they're the first ones to show up, along with the chums right behind them. And then you have your sockeyes after that, which are typically going to be mid-July, early part of July, or mid-July. And then after that, you have your pinks right in line with them. And the pinks only run in even years.
That's right, every other year.
Yep,
Mm-hmm.
Yep. There's some places in Alaska that'll have some stray pinks show up in odd years too, but for the most part, they're every even. And then after that, the silvers are the last ones to show up in their mid-August. And they'll be there through the rest of the entire season.
And while they're all important
Mm-hmm.
species as far as the ecosystem goes, the two that really get fly fishermen excited would be the kings and the silvers.
Yeah,
and
certainly.
those are the ones that people love to target on a fly rod.
Mm-hmm.
And the kings show up early.
Yeah.
They tend to be huge in a lot of places,
Mm-hmm.
and you might be fishing those with a 9 or 10 weight even.
Right. Yeah.
And then of course the silvers are great because of the topwater action,
Mm-hmm.
and you can get into certain river systems and cookie cutter, large size silvers that
Mm-hmm.
are all one looks just like another, but they're all aggressive. They're hitting on top, and you can do that all day long.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I would say that the silver of all the salmon species are going to be your most aggressive and eager to eat a fly. I've seen them travel 20 feet to come eat a fly before. And of course, I've seen 3 or 4 silvers all at once try to eat a pollywog. So they're a lot of fun. They're a big attraction.
They're aggressive. They're acrobatic. They jump.
Exactly. And they're
great
really
on fun.
cool looking. You got that big type jaw and everything, and they get that really nice deep red when they turn. So they're just a really unique fish, and they're good to eat, of course. So if you want to take some fish home, you have that perk as well. The kings are definitely a big draw for folks, mostly just because it's the king. It's the grand fish of Alaska. It's that picturesque trophy photo of a big giant fish in your hand, and of course they taste great. In addition to that, They're a little bit trickier at times to get on the fly. You kind of have to dedicate some time to them. A lot of people like to go and swing for them, so you get a lot of your hardcore steelhead anglers from BC and the West Coast that really like to, spend some time on swinging for steelhead. They like to do that as well. But if you don't mind going out and doing a little bit of trolling or something on maybe the lower Nushagak or some other river, and just have some fish to fill the freezer, it's absolutely 100% a great fish to do that.
And there's always something. That's the neat part about the Alaska summer season. So let's get back to the big rainbows. Mm-hmm. Now, you could make the argument that early season, they're a little more aggressive, and they're there. They've just come off of a big, hard Alaskan winter, so they're looking to eat, and they're voracious. But when you get later into the summer, that same fish may have gained 30% in body weight. I mean, they get fat and heavy.
They really do.
And they get healthy. They're just spending every waking moment eating during that limited window that is the Alaskan summer. Let's talk about targeting the big trophy rainbows. What are your thoughts on that? And what are some of your favorite times of year and favorite places to do so?
Certainly. I would say that the prime time for targeting your rainbow trout in Alaska is going to be that late August and then month of September, even early October. And that largely just has to do with, in part, those fish, as you mentioned, they've just had nothing but food chucked at them the entire summer season. And so they've put on a lot of weight. And once you start getting to that later season, those salmon start to go down in numbers a little bit. They've died off. The silvers are still around probably, but they're also kind of at the end of their life cycle. And, so all those small cookie cutter fish are now migrating back downriver. But those big fish are all resident. They don't go anywhere. Where they live is within that 1 or 2 mile stretch of river that you found them in early season. They never leave. And so a lot of times you're left with maybe not as many numbers, but the fish you do bump into are quality.
It's good time to go hunt the pigs.
Exactly.
That time of year.
Yep. And again, it's like with any fishery, you probably need to put in some time into it, dedicate yourself to it, and realize that it's not going to be that every single cast or every fish you catch is going to be 28 inches in size. But you're going to have encounters with them very often. And whether you catch them or not, that's kind of up to you. But
they're there.
But they're there.
They're definitely there. So we've talked about these big rainbows. We've talked about the 5 different species of Pacific salmon. And for a lot of people, they say, well, okay, that's Alaska. You just described it. But that's not quite true. I mean, there are a number of other great species up there that you can go after with a fly rod. Talk to us a little bit about some of the other opportunities you can find throughout Alaska.
Certainly. Well, we've got a great steelhead program in Alaska, and a lot of people don't really associate Alaska with steelhead. And, Southeast Alaska is probably one of those untapped fisheries that people just don't even think about as far as steelhead is concerned. And that steelhead season is generally going to be April, first part of May. So it's very short. It's only about 5 weeks long.
But it's much earlier than your traditional trout season in Bristol Bay and other parts of Alaska.
Yep. And that's also a reason why people just don't think of it, because it's just outside that window, that classic window. But Southeast Alaska, they have an incredible steelhead run. They're all wild. And they're perfect. You don't see a single net scar, hook scar, anything on these fish. They're usually dime bright because they're straight from the ocean. And we work with 2 great programs. We got Alaska Charter Service. It's a live-aboard program called the Adventurous. And they travel all the way around, Prince William Sound and St. Petersburg, Wrangell, that area. And they just hit these little creeks that are glacial fed and mostly fed by rainwater. And you go and hike up these creeks, and you're only hiking maybe a mile, maybe 2 miles, depending on your physical abilities. And you're pocket fishing some of these spots where these 30+ inch steelhead are hanging out, and they're all dime bright from the ocean.
Yeah, that whole Tongass area down in Southeast Alaska is incredible. There's something like 300 different coastal streams and rivers that feed into that area. So the fishing opportunities are endless.
It really is. And, a lot of folks will ask me, what are the names of these rivers you go and fish?
Say, we don't talk about that.
We don't talk about it, but for one, they don't have names.
That's right.
They just haven't been put on the map.
One of our favorite outfitters up there will make names up all the time.
Oh, yeah.
Like, you're at so-and-so creek. And then people come back and fish and say, I fished, so-and-so creek. It's like, no, you didn't.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
No, that's a different name that they gave them this year.
That's right. Well, so you got the steelhead. I mean, you've got so many other species, the dollies, the char, you've got sheefish, you've got an incredible pike fishery as well.
Yeah.
That's something that people oftentimes overlook when it comes to Alaska.
Oh, certainly. So northern pike are found all over Alaska. So, if you really wanted to get into a couple of pike, you could do it. I would say one of the best places, if you really are a northern pike addict and really love that, it's going to be up on the Yukon drainage at a program called Midnight Sun Trophy Pike Adventures. And the Yukon is just home to some toothy critters and large pike that are hungry and aggressive. And it's not a game where you're fishing a 6-weight. You're fishing 9, if not 10 weights.
And these fish are huge.
And they're huge, yeah.
Yeah.
And I can't remember what the biggest fish they had that Scotty mentioned, but 50-inch fish.
Yeah, every year they're getting over 50, and lots in the 40s.
Yeah.
And big numbers and big sizes, and a totally unique fishery that oftentimes people don't think about when you're having the Alaska conversation.
Exactly.
That's some of the best pike in the world.
Yeah.
That's pretty neat. So talk to us a little bit about, when you're planning a trip to Alaska, what do you need to think about on the how to get there aspect? Where does an Alaska trip typically start, and what's involved with the flights and the travel to Alaska?
Certainly. Most of the time, people are going to be getting to Anchorage. That's the central hub and starting point for basically almost all Alaska programs, with the exception of, Southeast. And so you're always going to want to get to Anchorage. That's going to be your starting point. Get there the day or two before your trip begins to overnight. That way, there's always weather delays here and there, or bags get lost in commercial airlines. So it's good to give yourself some cushion time. And plus some time to go explore Anchorage and the surrounding area. But yeah, overnight there, and then the next day is typically when you hop on a charter flight that's going to take you directly to the lodge or to a village that the lodge is going to be picking you up from.
Gotcha. So everything kind of starts in Anchorage, begins and ends out of there, and then you may go on to King Salmon or Dillingham or Iliamna, at which point you're meeting your lodge, and there you go. Your adventure begins.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right on. So one question we get a lot is from people that are looking for family trips or couples trips. How conducive is Alaska as a destination for both of those types of scenarios?
Oh, it's absolutely conducive. I think that it's a great place for families. I would say that if you had a 2-year-old, maybe wait a few years. But if you have a son or a daughter that's 7, 8, 9, 10, whatever, Alaska is wonderful because, like we were talking about before with August and those 50, 60 plus fish days, all those kids got to do is just keep that fly in the water, and they're going to have an absolute ball. It's definitely a no-brainer. And the guides up there are so great about working with families and instruction and making sure the kids are having fun that, it's 100% a family destination.
Well, and we get asked all the time, is 8, 10, 12 too young to bring my kid? I've actually hosted a trip up there the last few years. We do it around Father's Day. So we call it, a father-child trip, and you bring your son or your daughter. We go and we take over the lodge for a week, and it's all dads and their kids, and it's unbelievable. And I've had, I think I brought my youngest up there when he was 6. Yeah. And as you said, they stand in shallow water. They're swinging flies. They're just roll casting, and they're not fishing, they're catching. And that's what makes it so great for kids is you want to turn them on to a lifelong love of fly fishing, get them to Alaska at a young age and show them how great it can be and how fun it is to actually catch fish. Yeah. Because, we can go anywhere in the lower 48. It's like, well, you got to learn patience. Well, 7 or 8 or 10-year-old may not want to really focus on the whole patience part of things. Good luck. But you go to Alaska, and as we said, they're catching. And it's one of the best places in the world to get your kids started in fishing and really help them develop that love for fishing that'll last forever.
Yeah, and it's such a cool experience, too, because especially if you're there during the midsummer season, even in July, you can see a ton of wildlife. You can go do some bear viewing if you want to, maybe over at Brooks Falls, which is also an incredible fishery. And just the overall experience of being around plains and being in Alaska and the wilderness. And, it's just a really neat experience for a young kid that may not have that much experience with it at all. So I think it's a wonderful place for kids.
Oh, something about climbing into a float plane.
Yeah.
De Havilland Beaver early in the morning, taking off from the lodge, flying over the wilderness, seeing just how vast things are, and then proceeding to have the greatest day of fishing in your life. Those are formative experiences for sure. And I know you've got a list of great lodges that are ideal for kids, families, couples, so people can contact you and further discuss that. Let's shift gears just a minute and talk a little bit about equipment. And this is another question that you probably get all the time. Okay, I want to go to Alaska, but what do I need? What should I bring with me? What's kind of the go-to Alaska setup as far as rods and reels go?
Yeah, I would say the standard setup for Alaska is going to be 6 and 7 weights for your trout, dolly varden, grayling. You can bring a 5 if you want to do some fun stuff with dry flies. But 6 and 7 weights are kind of the name of the game. And then, of course, 8 weight for your salmon. And I find myself personally fishing a 7 weight more than anything, just because a 7 weight just has the ability to be really versatile and carry bigger flies. It can carry some mouse patterns that might be a little bit less wind aerodynamic, I guess. And also, if you happen to bump into a salmon on accident, you can handle him as well, So I think a 7 weight is great, but it just kind of depends on, what personal preference is. But
so if you're putting together kind of your Alaskan quiver, you might have like a 6, 7, and 8. That would cover most bases for you?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. And if you're going after those big trophy pike, maybe it's a 9, or
9
going
or
after
10.
kings, maybe something even bigger. So how many of the lodges that you work with up there, Camille, provide equipment versus those that don't have anything?
A lot of them, actually. And it's of course, it's specific to the lodge. But, that being said, a lot of times you can go up there and have everything basically taken care of for you. And that includes waders and boots, flies, things of that nature. So a lot of times you may not need to bring much at all.
You show up with your clothes and a pair of sunglasses, and they've got everything else you need.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes it pretty easy for sure. Another question we get a lot about Alaska is the cost. And it's important to realize that, one, it's not going to be as inexpensive as other freshwater destinations and certainly other U.S. destinations. You understand that when you get there and realize that almost everything that goes into these remote out camps is flown in.
Yeah.
So right there, it's going to be more expensive. But talk to us a little bit about the cost and what we kind of see across the spectrum on what it takes to spend a week fishing Alaska.
Yeah, for sure. Well, as you mentioned, Alaska is, for the lack of a better way to put it, it's not a cheap place. I mean, a gallon of milk up there is over $10. And so, it's good to have that in mind when you're thinking about planning a trip to Alaska. First and foremost, it's going to be an investment. And I would say that you're looking at a price range that can be anywhere from starting at $5,000 per person for a week, all the way up to, the creme de la creme of $11,000 a week per person. So there's a pretty big range. But, depending on what you're looking for, we can kind of narrow it down to best fit you. We have options for just about everything.
You have close to 20 different lodge and outfitting
20.
operations that you work with in Alaska. So really the whole spectrum.
Yes, we do.
You've got some that are high value trips,
Yep.
some that are kind of fixed base camps where you may be jet boating or floating each day. And then on the far end of the spectrum, you've got your fly out lodges.
Yes.
And those are going to be more expensive. But every day you're stepping into, the de Havilland, the beaver, the otter, whatever it is you're flying out of that lodge. Off you're going to a different area, a different watershed, a different river. What are the benefits of a fly out lodge?
Certainly. Well, fly out lodge is what I would consider kind of the once in a lifetime type trip where, over the course of 6-7 days, you are packing in as much as you possibly can. And that ranges from the fisheries to the amount of country you see, to the amenities, to the guides, to, the whole thing. And a fly out lodge is really great because, if you have a situation where the home river of the lodge is blown out, you can hop in that aircraft and fly somewhere else. And you don't have to worry about fishing in water you can only see 2 inches deep in. And so that gives you a lot of flexibility. And also, it just gets you to other places that normally you wouldn't ever see. At one lodge, for example, you can fish 6 to 7 different rivers in the course of a week.
That's right.
And not only that, you also have the ability to be flexible. And let's say you want to go fish silvers on the coast for a day. You can hop in that plane and go do that. Whereas if you were at a fixed base, you have to wait for the fish to come to you. And so you have a lot of flexibility in your week. And there's really no limitations. Of course, the weather might get in your hair a little bit, in which case you have a great home water fishery right there you can access to. But that being said, sky's the limit.
Well, and the fly out deal is a different level. But,
it is.
I heard a lodge owner say years ago, I'll never forget this. He said, well, the reason, we don't own airplanes because they're fun or cheap or easy. We own them because it gives our clients the greatest diversity of fishing, and it gives us the broadest plan. We can fish you in the most distant waters, everything you possibly want, and we can go where the fishing is best. And that's really what a fly out lodge delivers.
Absolutely.
It's not the cheapest option. You're going to pay for it, but it's going to deliver a completely different Alaskan experience than you might get by focusing, say, on one river or one particular area, which is fine as well. It's just different.
Yes.
And I think that's important to mention. That's right. So one question, Camille, that I did want to ask is, when someone's preparing for a trip or they're planning a trip, what can they do on the front end to really set themselves up for success once they arrive? What kind of pre-trip preparation tips do you have for people that want to head to Alaska?
Yeah, this is after they've already got their trip booked and flights booked, everything.
That's right.
Yeah, so I would say you're going to want to go through your checklists, make sure that you're going to have all the right equipment, make sure that, if the lodge isn't going to be providing something, make sure that that you're going to have that and need to bring it. As far as flight schedules and everything go, always check things 24 hours in advance. If you're going to be doing some hiking and everything, probably be a good idea to make sure you're in relatively decent shape and can get out and do some hiking, because there are places in Alaska where you can do a lot of walking.
Your guides will appreciate that.
The guides will absolutely appreciate that. And, I'm always a proponent, even if the lodge is going to provide some flies for you, if they say that's included in the package, I am a proponent of bringing some flies with me, just because I like that personal security of having a box in case for some reason something's not provided. But also then, I don't have to get into the reserves of what the guides have there for their whole season. And so that's kind of a personal thing for me. So I always do recommend maybe bringing a small selection. But ultimately, just make sure you got all your equipment, go through your checklist, check your flight itineraries, make sure you got your hotels booked early.
That's a big one in Anchorage.
The hotels in Anchorage get booked up so fast. Yeah. And so you want to do that as early as you can. And, and
you bring up a good point about doing things early. I mean, especially with some of these more in-demand lodges, right? The further out you can book that trip, the better your chances of getting the week that you want, getting that prime window.
Yeah.
Don't wait. If you want to go to Alaska 2 summers from now, start looking at it right now and start the planning process.
Yeah, I mean, there's no shame in getting started over a year in advance. Absolutely not. Alaska's a competitive industry, and there's a lot of people that want to go see it, and these lodges have big reputations that are good, and they will completely fill up in advance. So it's good to get on the game early.
That's right. Now, I got to ask you one more question. We're kind of nearing the end here, but one thing that people always ask, if they haven't been to Alaska before and they're not necessarily comfortable with the full-blown wilderness experience, are the bears.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bears in Alaska, right?
Yeah,
and when
there
you
are.
go out, especially on a lot of the rivers in Bristol Bay, you are going to be in and amongst the bears every day of your trip.
Yeah. Yeah, you really are. And a lot of people are very nervous about that. That's probably one of the number one things I get when we're talking about bears. It's like, well, I don't want to have to run into a bear and I don't know what to do. Like, what do I do? Do I need to bring bear spray? Do I need to bring my own gun? And it's like, no, you don't. First off, you can't fly with bear spray.
Yeah, please don't bring bear spray.
Don't bring it.
In the beaver with you.
No,
That's right.
don't. But the big thing is those bears are so focused on the salmon and what those fish are doing that they literally probably don't even know you're there. And those guides up there, they know what to do. They know what bear etiquette is. They've been trained. They've been around bears a lot. They deal with them every single day. And so eventually you just kind of get to this point where, well, they're just kind of like a dog. They're there and they're doing their thing. you don't interact with it, it's not going to interact with you. And eventually it'll wander off and go chase a pot of salmon somewhere. And it's just, if anything, a really cool photo opportunity.
It's an amazing part of that whole Alaskan experience. And you might be, on Funnel or Moraine or the American, and you may see 30, 40, 50 bears in a day.
Yeah,
They're everywhere. But as you said, they don't care. They've got tons of food. And there's so many bears around that they're not territorial. So they're not typically aggressive at all. And it's just part of that overall Alaskan experience.
It is. It really is. And it's really neat. And Brooks Falls, that's an experience in itself right there. And I always recommend if people can get there and see it, they really should. Just because, at one point in time, you could have 20 bears in your peripheral vision and you're fishing right in amongst them. And it's an extraordinary experience. I think people need to see it at least once.
Yeah, it's iconic Alaska right
it
there.
Is,
float plains, bears, and big trout. For sure. It's amazing. So, as we wrap things up, Camille, give me 3 final takeaways, 3 key pieces of advice for planning a successful trip to Alaska.
Yeah, I would say the 3 big things. Number 1 being know what you want to do. Figure that out first and foremost. If you're, like we were talking before at the beginning of our conversation, if you're a dry fly fisherman, if you like indicator fishing and want to catch a lot of fish, if you don't care about numbers but want trophy, that's going to help you narrow down when to go. And then, of course, after that, you have your 3 different lodge experiences, your fly out, fixed base, multiple overnight float trips. Based on that, you can kind of narrow down a lodge. And then after that, everything else kind of falls into place. So that's kind of the first thing. Know what you want to do or figure that out. Next thing is establish your budget. So we talked about Alaska's expensive. So if you kind of have a budget for yourself and what you want to shoot for, that's going to really help things out for you. And then I think the most important thing we just talked about, booking early. Because Alaska, it does fill up and it fills up fast. And if you're late to the game, especially for that July, August timeframe, even September, you're kind of out of luck.
You're going to have very limited options.
You're going to have very limited options, yes.
That's right. Well, great advice there. And I have one final question for you, Camille, and I always like to ask this of our guests. Why fly fishing? What's the draw and the connection for you on a personal level about fly fishing?
Man, well, it's going back to what I said earlier. It's really kind of all I've ever known, and I keep going back to it. Not to say that I'm against spin fishing, because I would gladly pick up a spinning rod and hook a Mep spinner or a spoon 200 feet. Gladly do that. I think it's a lot of fun. But it's something that is very familiar to me, fly fishing is. And it's soothing and it's kind of therapeutic. And it's just, I don't even know if I have words for it. It's just something I really am passionate about. And I love being able to share it with friends and family and other people. And because I know that they know what I'm talking about too. I'm sure you know that feeling I'm talking about, because it's something you don't really express. You just kind of feel it.
Oh, great answer. Well, thank you so much for spending time with us today and for the great information about fishing and planning a trip to Alaska. That's it for this episode of Waypoints, the podcast that is 100% dedicated to travel, adventure, and exploration. Be sure to visit yellowdogflyfishing.com to plan and research your next Alaskan trip or a trip anywhere in the world. And be sure to sign up for newsletters and notifications of new podcast episodes delivered right to your inbox. Join us for our next episode of Waypoints, and always remember, no matter where you go or where you find yourself, no one ever regretted a life of adventure.
This has been another episode of Waypoints, the podcast of fly fishing travel and adventure angling. Thank you for joining us, and be sure to visit yellowdogflyfishing.com for more trip updates, travel news, expert advice, and adventure profiles.